Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll make a start and see if people keep joining us in the next few minutes. So I'm Tatiana Pignon, and I'm from Autonomy. I'm one of the co-authors of the report that we're presenting today, that hopefully you can see on the screen, Making It Stick, the UK 4-day-week pilot 1 year on. I'm very happy to be joined today by a great panel to discuss our findings, which we published last week. So first by Dr. David Frayne, a research fellow at the University of Salford and co-author of the report, by Kyle Lewis, Autonomy's co-founder and director, who is also a co-author of the report. And David and Kyle also worked obviously on the original UK pilot in 2022. And then by Nicci Russell, the CEO of Waterwise, charity that participates in the UK pilot and then in the follow-up study, and Ruth Llewellyn as well, the assistant director of people for the housing organization Merthyr Valleys Home, who led on implementing the 4-day week at Merthyr Valleys. So very happy to be joined by all of you. Thank you so much for being here, and very much looking forward to hearing from you in the course of this webinar. So just to introduce the discussion, I'll start with a quick presentation of the study, what we did, and kind of the main findings from the report. This will be followed by a short discussion with David and Kyle about what we learned from the research, what this teaches us about how the 4-day week fares in the long term, how different models and approaches might compare with one another in terms of making policy sustainable, long-term maximizing benefits as well. And finally, we'll hear from Nicci and Ruth about their first-hand experience on leading their organization's journey to a 4-day week very successfully, might I add, and how to make it stick in practice. And we'll then have some time for questions from the audience and kind of a more open discussion as well before wrapping up. So yeah, I will start by giving a short introduction to the report. So as most of you will know, this study is a follow-up on the world's largest ever private sector pilot of the 4-day week, which took place in the UK in 2022 and had 61 organizations, about 2,900 workers in total. So in this follow-up study, we had a few questions in mind. 3 of the main ones were first finding out obviously where the policy was 1 year on from the end of the pilot, and how does the 4-day week fare in the long term. Second, what strategies do companies use to transform their organizations and make the 4-day week their new normal beyond the time of the pilot itself? And third, what lessons can be learned as well from these organizations' experiences if we dig a little bit deeper into implementation strategies 18 months on from first introducing the policy, right? So 1 year on from the end of the 6-month pilot is actually 18 months of feedback over implementation of the policy. The study was led, much like the original pilot study, by a collaborative team with researchers from Autonomy, from the University of Salford, from the University of Cambridge, and as well support from the research team at Boston College in the US, who provided in particular the well-being assessment data that I will present in a second. And so thanks to all of this involvement and the different components of the study, we got a policy update from all the participating companies from the original pilot. We also got a well-being assessment 1 year on for staff at 47 of the participating organizations in total, and additional qualitative engagements with staff and managers at 28 organizations, which represents about half of the original cohort, slightly less. So this gives us a quite comprehensive view of what has happened since the end of the pilot. So now turning to the key findings from the report. The main one is 1 year on from the end of the pilot. We know that at least 54 organizations out of the original 61 are still operating a 4-day week. So that's an 8-9% success rate that is now confirmed 1 year on from the end of the pilot. We know for sure as well that at least 31 of them have made the policy permanent. I should say that when we say this, it means that that number may in fact be higher because we did not necessarily get a detailed update from everyone. So these are the numbers that we're sure about that have been confirmed to us. Another key finding is that 4 managers who participated in our study, and this is a really kind of striking number, 100% of them said that the impact of the 4-day week on their organizations was either positive or very positive, which was, again, really interesting and important finding for us. 55% said very positive. And then in addition to health and well-being benefits being maintained 1 year on, I'll come back to this in our staff feedback form as well, which covered 294 staff. We had 96% of them that said that a 4-day week had a positive impact on their lives, which was, again, quite amazing feedback on the impact of the policy in the longer term. So first off, in terms of policy update, just to give you a sense of what kind of 4-day weeks we're talking about. The average reduction in working hours, we are talking here about reduction in working hours, right, on a weekly basis, was 6.6 hours per week. And that represents, on average, a 17% reduction in weekly working hours compared to the pre-pilot period. So the majority of companies that we got this information for reduced their weekly hours by a full working day, 7 or 8 hours, depending on contracts. As you can see on the graph that's on the slide here, however, there is really no one size fits all in terms of how that working time reduction is then implemented in practice. So the most popular model is to have a full day off each week, but that can look differently for different organizations. So as you can see, some organizations choose a universal day off, where effectively the organization closes for a full day every week. But there are also staggered models where different people across the organizations have different days off, thus maintaining 5-day coverage. And there are also other models that can be utilized. And this is a really important point for us because it means that the 4-day week can, in effect, be tweaked to kind of fit an organization's operational needs. And in particular, we found that centralized models, and we'll hear more about this a bit later on as well, can work really well for organizations that have very complex or varied types of operations, as they allow different teams or different parts of the organization to implement working time reduction in different ways. In terms of the impact that the 4-day week has on organizations, as I said, the feedback is really positive, but what kind of benefits are observed by managers? So when asked what the shorter working week had changed for the organization, we had 82% of surveyed companies that reported improvements in staff well-being, which is obviously relatively expected. We were kind of hoping that this would be still the case 1 year on from the pilot, and relatedly benefits observed in terms of motivation and morale as well. 50% also mentioned positive effects on reducing staff turnover, and 32% said that the policy had noticeably improved recruitment. I should add as well that the question here was really what kind of impact did you observe? So these were the benefits that were spontaneously cited when asked that open question. And finally, 46% of organizations also described positive change in terms of ways of working and productivity, leading to maintained or increased overall performance. And this is corroborated really by the feedback that we got from staff in the feedback form and the interviews that we led, as many also indicated efficiency gains, better prioritization, improved focus, and overall kind of smarter working across their work lives as well. So speaking of staff feedback, this again was also really positive. So first, really important to note that improvements in physical and mental health, in work-life balance, and in general life satisfaction that were found at the end of the 6-month pilot, so 1 year ago, were all maintained, as well as the reductions in burnout as well. So this proves that the results are not short-lived. These are lasting benefits of working a 4-day week, and not only a kind of bump coming from the pilot itself. Interestingly as well, work intensity has decreased and is now even lower than it was before the pilot started. So this is a really encouraging finding as well, because there had been a slight increase in work intensity during the pilot itself, as can often be the case when there's a big organizational change. But as the policy has settled, this seems to now have receded, which again seems that to indicate that a 4-day week, as it settles, creates sustainable ways of working that can enable those benefits to last long term without necessarily making work more difficult. And finally, job satisfaction is slightly lower when compared to the endpoint of the pilot, but nevertheless remains significantly higher than it was prior to the introduction of the 4-day week. So on average, we're talking here about a 0.3 point reduction in job satisfaction compared to the end of the pilot. And yeah, that's still significantly higher on average than before the pilot. So without going into details as well here about the qualitative feedback we got from people, I have to say that just reading through that feedback and hearing about it in interviews was really quite amazing in terms of people explaining in which ways and to what extent the 4-day week might have improved their lives. So the report goes a little bit deeper into those personal stories for anyone who's interested. So from all of these stories and testimonies from organizations that participated in it, what can we learn about how to make the 4-day week stick and create a policy that will be successful in the long term? So here we've put some of the main elements that arose from the study. The first one is preparedness and kind of supporting and enabling measures that can be implemented to enable working time reductions. That's very often been cited as a key element of success. And this relates to having a preparation phase before starting trial. Organizations stress often that works even better if you collect input from staff for a number of reasons, by reviewing current ways of working as well in order to find efficiencies and initiate positive change, and also through clear communications throughout about both the policy itself and the accompanying measures that support working time reduction. Secondly, we've seen the attitude towards conditionality or not of the policy being another important element of a 4-day week policy. So unconditional models are most favored in the organizations that we've studied. They seem to maximize both well-being benefits, but also to provide a strong incentive for the organization to change its ways of working as well. In certain cases, however, organizations do make the 4-day week conditional on meeting certain conditions or business goals. And in such cases, it's really important to ensure clarity about the policy and the conditions for time being taken off, and to ensure fairness as well. So that is making sure that everyone across the organization in different roles can benefit to the same extent. Thirdly, the level of protection of the time off is also an important element. So in the long term, we find that highly protected models tend to fare better, as they avoid putting additional stress on staff about whether or not the time off will actually be able to be taken. When the time off is more weakly protected, what we found to be important in order to maximize the kind of benefits is to mitigate those limitations by ensuring, first of all, clarity and shared guidelines about what is worth interrupting a day off. And secondly, as much as possible, providing predictability or a degree of predictability about which days might be interrupted or not. So for instance, thinking potentially about rotating on-call systems so that you know when you're completely off or when you might be called in certain situations. And finally, the last point that we wanted to highlight is about keeping in mind that trial is meant to obviously try out something new and find adaptations as needed. So it's important to have an openness to trying out new ways of working or of organizing work. There's an element of learning as we go and tweaking the policy over time. So we see success stories from organizations who, instead of when an issue comes up, giving up immediately, have actually worked through those potential issues, potentially adjusting the model, the policy itself, potentially introducing new supporting measures in order to mitigate those issues. And not only does that maximize the chances of finding a 4-day week model that would then work long-term for the organization and does bring those lasting benefits, but many managers and CEOs we've talked to also stress that the process itself makes the organization stronger overall, as it provides an opportunity to kind of review how it works and make it as efficient as possible. So obviously the full study is publicly available on our website. So please feel free to head there to read the report in full and check out our research more broadly as well. I will stop sharing my screen now and turn to report co-authors. So Dr. David Frayne and Lewis. As I was saying, David is a research fellow in sociology at the University of Salford, and he's been working on the future of work and welfare for quite a long time. He's notably published The Refusal of Work in 2015. And he led the qualitative research analysis on the original UK 4-day week pilot in 2022, as well as for this follow-up study now. Carl Lewis was also one of the lead researchers on the original pilot and is a co-author on this follow-up study as well. He's Autonomy's co-founder and director, and with Will Strong, he's the author of Over Time, Why We Need a Shorter Working Week in 2021. So David and Kyle, obviously the findings are extremely positive. I think we're all struck and very happy with those results. But at the same time, what's interesting about it is also that there are lessons to be learned about, in particular, how the 4-day week is implemented, how different versions of it might yield different benefits. And obviously, it makes the research kind of progress, right, as well, in terms of how we think this might evolve in the future. And I'm thinking as well, 1 year ago in February 2023, coming out of the 6-month pilot, maybe you had some questions in your mind about how those results would fare in the long term. So have some of these questions gotten answered in this study now, and more broadly, when we are doing the research and now looking at those results, what is it that strikes you the most, that you find most interesting? So David, I'll give you the floor now.
Thanks, Tatiana, and it's really nice to see so many people. I'm not going to say too much that's too definitive. I just thought I'd make a brief statement about where I think the research is really in terms of the overall kind of state of play of knowledge about the 4-day week. Because I think we're in a really different place now than we were at the beginning of the original pilot in 2022. So we've seen the really high rate of organizations that are retaining the policy. We know it doesn't necessarily have to cause businesses to fall apart, and it can actually be a spark that improves operations in many ways, and that creates kind of solidarity around figuring out how to make it work and learning more about each other's roles so that cover can happen and all of those things. And we've also now had our first kind of opportunity to look at how the policy fares beyond the sort of initial excitement around a pilot. And we're seeing that the positive staff impacts that were recorded are remaining stable a year later. So I think when the initial pilot set out in 2022, the burden of researchers was to kind of do a kind of proof of concept of the 4-day week, right? We don't know a lot about it. Is this thing really feasible? But now that a lot of that work has been done, I think, this leaves researchers able to kind of move on to some more questions. Like I would almost say we're kind of entering a second phase with it now. And one of the things we wanted to do with this project was just to start differentiating more between types of 4-day week policy, because, the biggest lesson that we've learned is that there really is no one 4-day week. Whenever we speak to managers and staff, we hear a story in which all of these decisions, big and small, kind of had to be made, right? How are we going to structure it? Is that going to be the same for everyone? How are we going to prepare? How are we going to make sure there's equity with part-time workers and with workers maybe in different departments who might be doing very different kinds of work? How are we going to mesh this policy with provisions we already have around flex and our policies around annual leave? What is the 4-day week? Is it a perk? Is it a gift? Or are we going to formalize it in contracts? Are we going to guarantee it to staff as a right? Or are we going to set it up as something more conditional? And lots of other, decisions, big ones and small ones that are kind of made along the way. And we're beginning to kind of learn about how all these decisions have an impact on the outcome, on how deeply the policy benefits people at work and in their free time. And I think a big discussion that now needs to happen is how these decisions affect how a 4-day week sits in relation to values we might hold. So things like fairness at work, equalities at work, the priority of a sense of democracy and autonomy at work. Are some 4-day weeks, better at satisfying these ideals than others? So we know in general that the 4-day week has huge benefits, and we've kind of proved the concept. But what type of 4-day week is best at living up to these kinds of ideals? And I suppose the big question on the horizon is, what kind of actions and actors will be involved in trying to kind of scale this ideal model of a 4-day week up. So we've seen lots of pioneer organizations you know, but what might be the role for the government? What might be the role for unions, for example? So just to kind of summarize, you know, for me, taking part in the research in the pilots has been kind of really valuable, and it's not just about evidence and impacts and evaluation, although the figures around those are amazing, but they've also kind of been a chance to really learn something about that decision-making process and how the 4-day week is being kind of worked out on that kind of tiny level on the ground, by the teams of people who are kind of going first and really doing it. So for the interview team, this has been a really good chance to sort of ignite some debate around that and start moving the discussion in a kind of new direction in this kind of second stage of research. And I understand Kyle is going to kind of focus in a bit more on a couple of the specifics of the different models that we saw.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, so I think I just wanted to maybe draw some light on the kind of the nitty-gritty, as it were, in terms of how the 4-day week has been kind of implemented more in the longer term, particularly kind of coming out of the trial phase. And I think, as maybe been mentioned by David and Tatiana, I think a lot of people kind of understood how a 4-day week could work in a trial phase, but there's still been those kind of questions about how does the policy kind of evolve over time? How can it be kind of a sustainable way of working, not just when staff feel like they are being monitored in a particular trial situation? So I think the first thing that the report kind of looks at in detail, and I think is important for researchers, but also for other organizations thinking about doing this in the future, is about the model of implementation and the different models. So from our consultancy work, we say to every client that we work with that there is kind of no one size fits all model for doing this, and that basically the model that you kind of run with and choose should be based on the kind of complexities of your organization, and how feasible that model is, but then also kind of balancing that with the kind of desires of staff. So what is a model that can actually, you know, make a kind of genuine difference to staff's life? And I think, you know, interestingly, the report kind of shows this, that there is no one size fits all for doing it, and there is kind of various models. And it was great to see, again, from the beginning, when, you know, staff were onboarding and we were kind of saying how it could, you know, it could work, that people kind of went off and did, you know, found out and found a particular model that kind of worked for them. And we're seeing various ways this can be implemented now. So whether it's from a kind of universal day off, so, you know, where everyone in the organization has a Friday off, or kind of a staggered approach where, you know, it's more of a kind of shift pattern, or kind of more flexible work policies. They're all kind of having success and work in their own different ways. I think what was interesting, particularly that kind of stood out as one of the findings, was the relationship between the model and the model chosen, and whether the policy had been made a permanent policy. So we concluded that 95% of the companies that opted for a universal or staggered model had decided to kind of run and keep it as a permanent condition, whereas this compared to only 60% who operated a more kind of flexible model. So it might be, you know, interesting to kind of think what are the reasons for that. I mean, from our kind of experience and from talking to staff, I think in particular the universal model is something that is really kind of cherished by staff, not only in terms of having that clarity of having kind of potentially 3 days off together, but also one of the biggest benefits seem to be that it's not generating internal work on that day. I think from our experience of talking to, you know, particularly kind of part-time workers or workers who have unconventional, don't just have kind of standard Monday to Friday working, that it can be kind of stressful knowing that on your day off, when you're not working, that internal work is being generated. So I think, you know, one of the big benefits of particularly the universal policy is that it does, you know, it becomes like a kind of weekend day where work isn't being generated. And I think staff really kind of feel the benefits of that reduction in potentially in workload, and not feeling the stress of coming back in and having a full intro, as it were. I think one of the other interesting aspects of the report is the focus on the protection of time. So again, the level of protection offered kind of differed from, you know, certain organizations. For some, it was kind of highly protected and seen as another day off, like the weekend. For others, it was much more kind of it was less protected, and there could be a chance that you'd have to kind of work depending on the kind of workload of the organization. So what we did see in the research, though, that there does seem to be a correlation in terms of staff benefits, where there is kind of higher protection of time off for the extra hours. And I think that's due to a few factors that we kind of heard from staff. And the main one being, obviously, for people with caring responsibilities, having that clarity, knowing that that day will be a day off, it's very beneficial in being able to kind of organize those caring responsibilities. I think another one is just being able to kind of genuinely switch off from work and not knowing that that you might be called in, or that you on a Thursday afternoon you're told actually you're going to be working tomorrow. I think that can be a real benefit. And just in general, we heard from staff just being able to kind of generally plan life activities on that day off was something that they kind of really valued, particularly when it comes to kind of life admin and being able to do all those bits and bobs in that day off was something that was really kind of valued by staff. And then finally, the other kind of theme that I wanted to focus on and draw some attention to was this issue of conditionality. So when we're talking about conditionality, what we're talking about here is the policy being contingent on certain conditions being met. So for the majority of the organizations we engaged with, they did not operate a policy under a conditional model. However, for 25% of the organizations, there was a kind of conditional aspect to it. And again, this kind of differed in that kind of conditional model. For some, it was much more kind of focused on an organizational level. So, if the organization was hitting certain KPIs or, certain kind of financial targets, then the policy would be kept. For others, it was kind of operated more on an individual level. So putting in place a certain kind of KPIs or certain kind of productivity or performance metrics for each individual in order for that to be, and that had to be met as a kind of condition of having the 4-day-week policy. And I think for the majority of staff that we kind of interviewed within organizations where there was conditional aspects to it, I think the majority were kind of respectful of that and kind of understood the reasons why, in terms of knowing that it had to be kind of feasible for the organization. It had to make kind of financial sense, and so there was a kind of, a decent understanding that it couldn't just be kind of operated as a general kind of condition of work. However, where we did see kind of high levels of conditionality, we did see kind of more kind of mixed results, and this tended to be around adding kind of more stress to deadlines and workloads. We did hear, from a few staff, a certain kind of resentment about feeling like certain people maybe within the organization weren't pulling their weight and that this was having an effect on them. And then just kind of, some feelings that it was kind of inequitable, that, certain people got to experience the policy and benefit from it while others didn't. And I think as, one of the kind of lessons that we kind of advocate in the report and in general in our consultancy work is to how to kind of avoid this is to think about the ways in which staff can be brought into the kind of decision-making process, that they kind of have ownership over the policy, so that some of the decision-making processes and understanding, why, what the kind of conditions are and how it could be met are kind of understood from the outset. So I do think that is a kind of really important part of the process, is including staff in the decision-making process from early on. So yeah, that's kind of it from me in terms of my kind of general thoughts. I mean, I think just to say as well, it's been amazing to see how the policy has evolved over time. So being involved, doing this in consultancy work now for nearly 5 years, it's amazing that every organization that takes it on, we learn new lessons from it. It's a really kind of evolving policy, and I think hopefully this report can help demonstrate that it is a kind of sustainable policy long term, and that can work in a variety of different work settings, not just ones you might traditionally think of, such as kind of backroom office organizations. So yeah, I'll hand back over to Tatiana.
Thanks, Kyle, and thanks, Dave. Really, really interesting points and that highlight yeah, as you say, that beyond the proof of concept, it's really all about implementation and how it's going to work out in any kind of specific context as well. And so from that perspective, particularly happy to be able to welcome today two people who have had a hand or more than a hand in implementation of a 4-day week policy and get to hear that kind of first-hand experience of how to do it in the specific context of an organization. So yeah, I'm very happy to welcome our next speaker, Nicci Russell. Thanks very much for being here. Nicci is the CEO of Waterwise, a small water conservation charity that's based in London, which took part in the UK 4-day week pilot back in 2022 and kindly agreed as well to participate in the follow-up study that we just published the results of. So thanks very much for that as well. Really important to get the research going. So Nicci led Waterwise through 4-day week, and now 1 year after the end of the first 6-month pilot, Waterwise has made the policy permanent. So yeah, thanks very much for sharing your journey, and the floor is yours.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm super proud to be here. Thank you for asking me. So I won't waste too much time explaining who we are. Tatiana's gone into that. We're an environmental campaigning not-for-profit. We are small, there are 10 of us, and actually, although we have a London address, we work from home. So that's the kind of shape of us, which informs some of the other stuff I'm going to say. So first of all, entering the trial. So I had been following for years the 4-day week, and increasingly people doing it and having brilliant experiences, but I did not feel confident enough to answer even my own questions, because in some ways it's counterintuitive, let alone questions that my board would come up with. So when my wellbeing champion at Waterwise, Laura, said, oh, look, there's a UK trial, and it was about 3 weeks before the deadline, I signed up. And Laura still says now that's the best email she ever sent. So we signed up for the trial, and it was super helpful. And I came to webinars like this, where people were talking about it as a normal thing. It works, and it just seems so doable. And the other thing that was massively useful to us was having the support from the trial team, because they were able to tell us, oh, you've got that question. Well, these are the 3 ways that people generally approach it. So for example, on KPIs, so the trial measured loads of things for us, but we're a small not-for-profit. We didn't have kind of KPIs. And one of the guys, the experts from the trial, said to me, well, look, you're not Google. How do you know you're doing well under a 5-day week? So I said, well, the money's going okay. We can see our impact, and, you know, feedback's good. He said, okay, use that for the 4-day week. So things like that were just invaluable, because otherwise you can get tied up. We already had a really strong culture of trust and well-being in the team, evidenced by the staff survey, and we have tools in place to manage workload. So that's kind of where the trial sat when we started with the trial. So starting the trial, it was June. It was a high annual leave period. We're a water efficiency campaigning organisation, and there was a massive drought and a huge heat wave. So we were getting loads of media requests, which we were doing on top of our normal work. So it's a little bit stressful. So one of my top tips would be maybe don't start during an annual leave period, a high annual leave period, sorry. For us, it was the summer. But we were really proud, because we managed to get through that. And after the initial teething problems, tying in with the research that's been presented today, it just it started to fit. So the other thing I was going to say was, this was the advice from the trial team: co-create. For that month in the run-up, some of us were attending the webinars put on by the trial team. But anyway, in our team meetings, we were coming up with efficiency tools as a team, things we could strip out, things we could do differently, and individual tools which we were picking up on the trainings. And that was really key. We co-created it, so we all felt a sense of ownership. So, oh, and just before I talk about what we do practically, so how did we communicate it to funders and stakeholders? We have about 65% of our funding comes from 18 companies. They're the water companies in the UK. So it's quite an unusual funding model. So we were like, oh God, what are they going to say? But the advice from the trial was, actually, you'll find it lands really well. And right the way through the trial, we surveyed them, and they all just kept saying, this is amazing. Let us know how it goes. We're super interested. We want to talk to our bosses about it. That's all we ever got. We never, ever got anything saying, how are you spending our money or anything like that? So totally positive. So what we do practically, we close on a Friday. And again, advice from the 4-day week team, that's quite often the model for a kind of thought leadership organisation where it counts to have the hours together. You know, if we close on a Friday, nobody dies. We aren't doctors. We're not running a chip shop as one of the organisations in the trial. It's a different model. So that worked really well. And we have voluntary agreements. So we have the contracts full-time, or in my case, my contract was already 4-day week, and then we apply the 20% efficiency in hours in a voluntary agreement. Annual leave is prorated. We keep the Friday, even if there's been a bank holiday that week, and we protect the Friday. We're very careful. Some of my more difficult conversations about it have been team members saying, but there's this really important meeting on a Friday. And because of the things that all three of you have said today, you know, it's not fair. It starts to change the rules a bit. If somebody might have caring responsibilities, it wouldn't be easy for them, and they might feel, oh, the Friday's not that protected. So for us, it's work to protect it. And the team-wide tools we use, and then I'll come on to the individual ones. So the team-wide tools, straight away we cut all our meetings to half an hour, save so much time, make sure they're purposeful, agendas, only invite the people that need to be there. Every interview I do about the 4-day week, I say, you know, this stuff is common sense, but it's just a case of actually doing it and not just saying, oh, isn't that a great idea, but actually doing it and embedding it and keeping it fresh. We block regular focus time in our diaries. We prep for meetings and start on time. With emails, we're really mindful about the action, by when, whether this is action, FYI, who for. And we don't expect, so email isn't live communication. If it's something that needs a reply within a couple of days, use a different ring or the WhatsApp group or whatever. And we regularly review the necessity and frequency of certain tasks, like should our newsletter still be monthly, that kind of thing. And then there are individual tools that we pick up and we collate, and each of us use a few. So I use Pomodoro, which I use for my emails. So I only do my emails now at certain times of the day. I'm not sort of drawn into them all day, every day. And I use Pomodoro, which is 25 minutes really focused activity, and then 5 minutes chill, and then back in 25 minutes really focused. And it really works for writing board papers and all sorts of things. I just get through them so much more efficiently. I'm just going to list off some of the ones that other team members there, and you can just make a note and Google them afterwards. There's Eat 4 Frogs, fixed time slots for emails I've mentioned, the 3-2-1 email technique, monk mode Mondays, one of my colleagues swears by that. Doing demanding tasks at peak energy time, I definitely do that. So late morning, I put really focused tasks in my diary. Quick end of day reflection. And then a less regular but more deep exercise around why do I do this task and how do I prevent me or someone else having to do it again. Line managers discussing the one-to-ones, how it's going regularly. So how are you getting on with your individual tools? Which ones do you use, just to make sure it's kept fresh? That's also really important for induction, because we've got colleagues that have come in that weren't part of the trial, so they didn't co-create it. We keep it live through all team training. And yeah, and I mentioned that induction is key. So let me just look at time. Oh gosh, I've gone well over. Right, I'm just going to summarize. Sorry, I said to Tatiana, I'm only going to need 6 minutes. How wrong I was. It's my favorite subject.
You're absolutely fine.
I'm gonna take maybe a minute and a half more. Apologies. So first of all, on governance, I mentioned at the beginning I just signed up, and afterwards I was thinking, oh, maybe I should have just run that past my board. And it's a really interesting one, because for the board, some of it is definitely strategic and some of it is definitely operational, and in the middle there's a really grey area. So learning point for me, I should have set out a decision-making framework at the beginning and what was board decision and what was for me. But they were really supportive. Alex Pang from the team came and did a Q&A for my board on Zoom. And we extended it to 12 months. So board decided, let's do a whole year. So we did a whole year trial and we carried on measuring the metrics. So just very briefly on results, then I'm going to finish on top tips. So on the staff view, it was 100% positive experience. 100% of them wanted to continue on a 4-day week. Majority would require a 26 to 50% pay rise to move away to work to a 5-day week organisation. It's brilliant for retention, which is super important in a teeny organisation like ours. And 100% of them said that their current workability was at the positive end of their lifetime best. So brilliant. Organisationally, revenue was better across the 12-month period. It crossed 2 of our financial years, but a comparator year was actually made a loss, and this one made a profit. Number of employees, resignations, new hires, that all improved against the comparator year. Sick days did go up, but COVID, plus I had a couple of surgeries in that time and there were only 8 of us, so, you know, small sample size. And it also helps with extending our brand reach. So water efficiency, you know, lots of people want to talk to me about 4-day week, including media. And then I get to talk about water efficiency. And one of our challenges at Waterwise is getting our voice known and our message. So that's been super helpful. So my top tips, it absolutely doesn't happen by magic. You can't just drop a day and carry on as usual, because how stressful would that be? You need everyone's explicit buy-in. You have to fundamentally change how you work, set out measures of success at the start, and be brave, go for it and do a trial. Definitely do a trial. I know 4 Day Week Global are always doing global trials, but they're very generous about including UK organisations in whatever area they're doing a trial at the time. We're super proud of being in the vanguard, and Laura, my wellbeing champion, and I do lots of joint articles talking about it. So I would say just to everybody on this call, it's completely doable. You can do it, and go for it. And sorry for running over. As you can see, it's my favourite subject.
Thanks so much, Nicci. No, that was great. Really inspiring to hear. And yeah, I think in particular the journey that you followed and kind of tweaking, extending the trial and making sure to review that regularly. Really inspiring. Thanks very much. I turn now to Ruth Llewellyn. So welcome, Ruth, and thanks very much for being with us today. You're the Assistant Director of People at the nonprofit housing organization Merthyr Valley's Home, which is based in the south of Wales, which also took part in the UK 4 Day Week ballot in 2022, and then again the follow-up study just now. You've got over 220 staff and some customer-facing operations as well. So the approach that you've adopted has been more decentralized and kind of a really proactive as well, and really interesting way of assessing and reviewing the policy as you go. Thanks very much for sharing your experience. Over to you.
Lovely, thank you, and nice to be here. Same as Nicci, this is my most favourite subject to talk about, so if I run on, just give me the nod. So yeah, as you've mentioned, I won't go into too much detail about us, but we own and manage around 4,000 homes in Merthyr. And our staff base, it has a huge variety. So we've got, as you said, we've got around 240 staff now. We've got a contact centre within there. We've got a repairs and maintenance team that work on repairs appointment system with our tenants, which are planned up to 4 weeks in advance. So quite complex in terms of how a 4 Day week would work within each of the individual service areas. We still operate a Monday to Friday service because for us, the thought of dropping a repairs service for our tenants 1 day a week meant that we wouldn't be providing the same service. We went into the 4 Day week trial wanting to make sure that there was no detrimental impact on the services to our tenants or our stakeholders. We're a mutual organisation, so that means our tenants and employees own us as a cooperative, and we apply our mutual values to everything that we do at Merthyr Valley's Homes. Similar journey, I guess, to Nicci. We saw the trial advertised quite late in the day, signed up really quickly. Our board said yes, then had a panic about how we were going to deliver this within 6 weeks. And we took a mutual approach. So we got all of our staff together in groups to ask them essentially how they could make it work. They know their roles far better than we know. I think one of my top tips would be there's a danger of overthinking it. There's a danger of sitting in a management meeting and wanting to answer every single question, and it would be impossible to do that without the input from your colleagues. And within the sessions that we had with our colleagues, the energy in the room was just amazing to see. Some of the solutions and ideas they had about not only how they could make it work personally, so we have some people that are carers, how it could work for them, but also how it could work for the business and what changes we would need to make to help it work. So for example, similar to Nicci, changing the way we approach meetings, put in a lot of trust in our colleagues to deliver their roles in the best way for them and say no to the things that didn't add value, and just that real overview of why are we doing the things that we're doing and why are we doing them in the way we do them, to make sure that everything that we were doing was efficient as possible. And some of the ideas generated from those initial staff sessions, I don't think we ever would have captured if we hadn't had the opportunity of presenting a 4 Day week to them. And we really started this process with our colleagues with 2 basic rules. One was there couldn't be any impact on our services, and the second was it couldn't cost us any more money. So for example, when the contact centre were designing their solution couldn't be, well, we'll just take on another couple of extra staff and they'll cover the days that we're not working. And Tatiana, Kyle and David, you've all talked about the various models today, and I think our organisation has probably got all of those models because we've truly left it up to our colleagues and teams to design what works best for them. Some people will have a set day which works for them, others will be on a rota-based system. We've also got people that do 2 half days, people that do 5 days, shorter hours, which allows them to do things like drop the children at school and pick them up without the worry of having to juggle childcare and do your work at the same time before and after school. And I guess for us, the results have shown that we've got consistent performance. We've got more data to collect on that. So we, last June, decided that we would extend our trial by a further 12 months. So we're due to review that with our board in May. And we're really hopeful at that point that we can make it a permanent decision, albeit we'll obviously continue to review performance to make sure that we continue to get those productivity gains. And I guess the reason for the trial for us was, one, it's actually a really, really brave decision to make this a permanent arrangement, because once you've done that and you've changed contracts of employment, it's really, really difficult to go back from that. And also just the breadth of data, I guess, that we wanted to capture. And every question we answer leads to another question. So really working with our board to figure out what they needed from us in terms of assurance to be comfortable that it's working and we're able to make that permanent arrangement. So we're really, really working on that at the moment. In terms of the impact on colleagues, I think that's where there's been the biggest gains. You know, we've been able to demonstrate consistent performance, but within that, our colleagues are absolutely more engaged, more motivated. They report significant improvements in their physical and mental health. And for us, we have seen a reduction in our sickness absence. It did take a while. Absolutely, short-term absence reduced quite quickly, but we've got some really, really good terms and conditions with things like really good sickness pay. It took a little while for our long-term sickness to reduce, but it has now come down by around 3%, which is significant for us in terms of our staff numbers, and also helps us deliver that 4-day week so that people can take time. We are protective of people's non-working day. We do say that there may be occasions where you may need to be called in. We've been operating this trial now for 18 months, and that's probably a small handful of occasions where we've been able to provide notice and something's really, really gone wrong and we've needed our colleagues' support, and they've been more than willing to help out because they wanted to provide a good service to our tenants. I think another real positive impact we've seen is the feedback from some of our carers. We had about 20% of our workforce with some element of caring responsibilities, and just the pressure, the less pressure they feel and the ability to manage and maintain employment whilst they also complete their caring responsibilities has been massive. And I guess the last thing from me is in terms of recruitment. So we've got some really tough to fill roles. We've got Welsh Government set a decarbonisation agenda. All housing associations in Wales are trying to pull the same resources at the same time with a limited skill set within Wales. And this is set us apart as different to some of the other housing associations. So we've really seen gains, and then also reductions in the amount of money we've had to spend on things like recruitment agency fees, because we've been able to recruit ourselves directly. But I guess the last thing on recruitment is it's been really important for us within the conversations around recruitment to make sure that we're testing on values as well, because we don't want people to work for us just because they think they have to work less hours. They need to really understand the principles and the approach of the 4-day week as well. And just the last thing to end on, we've measured loads and loads of things through this trial to make sure that it works for us and works for our colleagues and tenants. But I guess the one thing that we can't measure is how much more productive people are, because they are better rested and more motivated. Okay, thank you.
So I just want to say a huge thank you again to everyone for listening in and for participating, particularly to the panelists for being here and sharing your experience and input with us. Really insightful conversation. Thank you as well very much to everyone who participated in the research and to the report. It was definitely a team effort from all sides, and to all the organizations who let us kind of research their 4-day weeks. If you're interested in more, obviously, you can learn more on our website at autonomy.org. We have, if anyone has been inspired to kind of explore 4-day week for themselves, we have a rollout program starting next week. Actually, there's still time for sign-ups. So if you want to, you can email us or just find out on our website. And otherwise, thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Hope to see you again soon.